Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the person lying beside you has the body of a grown man, but the emotional reactions of a frightened child. He can build a company, drive a car, and pay a mortgage. He may have a beard, a deep voice, and decades of life experience. Yet the moment he faces criticism, conflict, rejection, or responsibility, he retreats. He sulks, he blames, he avoids, and somewhere inside him, a much younger version of himself takes control. Psychologists have a term for this phenomenon, not a formal diagnosis, but a powerful cultural description: the man-child. A man who has physically matured, but whose emotional development has been interrupted, delayed, or never properly cultivated. But why does this happen? Are these men simply selfish and immature? Or are they carrying invisible wounds from childhood? Could modern society itself be creating more man-children than ever before? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, how many of us are still children wearing adult costumes? This is the hidden psychology of the man-child. A child enters the world completely dependent. Every fear, every need, every discomfort is solved by someone else. Someone feeds him, someone protects him, someone tells him who he is. But growing up is not simply about getting older. True maturity requires a difficult psychological transformation. The child must learn to regulate his emotions, to tolerate discomfort, to accept responsibility, to understand that other people have needs that are just as important as his own. The journey from childhood to adulthood is one of the greatest transformations a human being can experience. But what happens when the journey stops halfway? What happens when a boy learns how to look like a man without learning how to become one? The answer is far more complex than laziness. Behind the adult who refuses responsibility may be a child who was never taught it. Behind the man who cannot express love may be a boy who was punished for showing emotion. Behind the person who avoids commitment may be someone terrified of vulnerability. The man-child is not born. He is shaped by family, by culture, by trauma, by expectations. And sometimes by a world that allows him to remain comfortable forever. To understand him, we must travel backwards, back to childhood, back to the place where emotional maturity begins. Every adult carries their younger selves inside them. The frightened child, the curious child, the angry child, the lonely child. Modern psychology often speaks about the concept of the inner child, the collection of early emotional experiences, memories, and coping patterns that continue influencing us throughout adulthood. This is not mystical. It is neurological and psychological. The brain develops through experience. The ways children learn to deal with fear, shame, conflict, and love often become the templates they use later in life. Imagine two boys. The first boy falls and begins to cry. His parent kneels beside him and says, "I know it hurts. Take a moment, you're okay. Let's figure this out together." The boy learns something important. Pain is manageable. Emotions can be expressed. Problems can be solved. Now imagine another child. He falls and cries. The response is immediate. "Stop crying. Don't be weak. Be a man." In that moment, the lesson is different. Your feelings are unacceptable. Your vulnerability is shameful. Your pain must be hidden. The child has learned survival, but survival is not the same as maturity. Years later, that same boy may become a man who cannot explain why he becomes angry whenever he feels criticized. He does not recognize the emotion underneath the anger, the shame, the fear, the insecurity. His emotional vocabulary never fully developed. Psychologist Daniel Goleman, who popularized the concept of emotional intelligence, argued that self-awareness and emotional regulation are fundamental skills for healthy relationships and success. Yet these skills are not automatically acquired with age. A person can be 40 years old and still possess the emotional coping mechanisms of a 12-year-old. This is one of the central contradictions of adulthood. Physical age and emotional age are not always the same, and this is where the story of the man-child truly begins. Before going further, we must make an important distinction. Being childlike is not a problem. In many ways, it is beautiful. A childlike person can be playful, creative, curious, spontaneous. Many of the world's greatest artists, inventors, and thinkers maintained a sense of wonder throughout their lives. But being childish is something different. Childishness appears when a person expects the world to revolve around their comfort. when frustration leads to emotional explosions, when responsibility is avoided. When every mistake must be somebody else's fault, the child says, "I broke the vase, but it's not my fault." The mature adult says, "I made a mistake. How do I repair the damage?" That small difference represents one of the greatest achievements of psychological development, the ability to confront reality without running away from it. Many man-child behaviors share a common root: avoidance. Avoidance of uncomfortable emotions, avoidance of responsibility, avoidance of difficult conversations. Avoidance feels good in the short term. Ignore the bill, you avoid stress. Ignore the argument with your partner, you avoid discomfort. Escape into video games, alcohol, endless entertainment, or fantasy. You avoid facing yourself. The brain rewards avoidance because it temporarily removes anxiety. But there is a cruel trade-off. Every responsibility you avoid today becomes a larger burden tomorrow. Every uncomfortable conversation you postpone becomes a deeper wound. Every emotion you suppress waits patiently to return. Like a child hiding under a blanket believing that the monster cannot see him, the emotionally immature adult mistakes avoidance for safety. But the monster is still in the room. It is simply growing larger in the dark. The first classroom of emotional development is not school, it is home. Long before a child understands money, careers, or society, he learns something far more important. How do relationships work? How do I deal with disappointment? What happens when I make a mistake? Am I loved only when I perform well, or am I accepted even when I fail? The answers to these questions become invisible rules carried into adulthood. And one of the most common paths toward man-child behavior begins with something that appears on the surface to be love. Overprotection. A mother who does everything for her son. A father who never requires accountability. A family that removes every obstacle before the child has the chance to struggle. It may look like kindness, but struggle is where competence is born. A child who never learns to solve problems becomes an adult who expects somebody else to solve them. An adult body with a dependent mind. But overprotection is only one side of the story. Some man-children are not overloved. They are emotionally neglected. They grow up in homes where their feelings are ignored, mocked, or punished. They learn that vulnerability is dangerous. They become experts at hiding their fears, and often the mask they wear is anger, arrogance, or avoidance. Because for many men, anger is the only emotion society has historically allowed them to display. The little boy who once whispered, "I'm scared," grows into a man who shouts, "Leave me alone." But the fear never disappeared, it merely changed its clothes. The tragedy of the man-child is this. He often spends his entire adult life trying to protect a wounded child that nobody else can see. But the more he protects that child through avoidance and denial, the less he becomes the man he was capable of becoming. And this leads us to a disturbing question. What happens when an entire culture begins rewarding emotional immaturity rather than challenging it? The answer may explain why the man-child appears to be more visible in the modern world than ever before. For thousands of years, growing up was not a philosophical question. It was a necessity. A boy became a man because life demanded it. By a certain age, he was expected to contribute to his family, protect his community, learn a trade, and carry responsibilities that affected the survival of others. The transition was harsh. Sometimes unfair, often unforgiving, but it was clear. Today, the path into adulthood is much less obvious. A person can reach 30 years old and still feel like they are waiting for life to begin. Not because they are incapable, but because modern life can provide endless ways to postpone the uncomfortable process of becoming. Imagine a difficult day. You have failed at work. Your relationship is struggling. You feel insecure about your future. Decades ago, your options for distraction were limited. You might go for a walk, speak to a friend, sit alone with your thoughts. Today, discomfort can disappear with the movement of a thumb, an endless stream of videos, a new television series, hours of gaming, social media designed to capture attention. A world of fantasy where achievements are easier than the complicated victories of real life. Now, it is important to understand something. Entertainment is not the enemy. Video games do not create man-children. Films do not create emotional immaturity. Millions of mature adults enjoy these things every day. The real question is it a source of relaxation after responsibilities have been fulfilled? Or has it become a hiding place from responsibilities that are never faced? That difference changes everything. A mature adult says, "I have worked, handled my obligations, and now I choose to enjoy myself." The man-child says, "I will enjoy myself now and somehow deal with the consequences later." But later eventually arrives. And it always demands payment. One of the greatest battles in human psychology is the conflict between the present self and the future self. The present self wants comfort. The future self needs discipline. The present self wants pleasure. The future self requires sacrifice. The ability to delay gratification has been studied extensively by psychologists. One famous example is the Stanford marshmallow experiment, where researchers observed whether children could resist eating one marshmallow immediately in order to receive a larger reward later. Although later interpretations showed that factors like environment and trust also influenced the results, the broader lesson remained valuable. The ability to think beyond immediate desires plays an important role in self-control and long-term decision-making. Maturity often requires choosing what is beneficial over what feels good in the moment, going to the gym when you would rather stay in bed, saving money when you want to spend it, apologizing when your pride wants to argue, having a painful conversation rather than silently building resentment. These moments are small, but they are the bricks from which adulthood is built. Human beings naturally seek comfort. There is nothing wrong with wanting safety, pleasure, and ease. The problem begins when comfort becomes the highest goal. A child seeks comfort because survival depends on others. An adult understands that growth requires voluntary discomfort. Learning a new skill feels uncomfortable. Admitting your mistakes feels uncomfortable. Taking responsibility feels uncomfortable. Changing your habits feels uncomfortable. But every meaningful transformation starts in that uncomfortable space. The man-child often lives according to a simple unconscious rule. The mature adult lives by another. This is one of the biggest psychological differences between childhood and adulthood. At first glance, a man-child can appear arrogant. He may act like he knows everything. He may reject advice. He may refuse to admit mistakes. He may blame everyone else for his failures. The obvious conclusion is, he has too much confidence. But sometimes the opposite is true. Beneath arrogance can exist profound insecurity, a fragile sense of self that cannot tolerate being wrong. The human mind is remarkably creative when protecting itself from emotional pain. Psychologists describe unconscious strategies called defense mechanisms. These are mental processes that help people manage uncomfortable feelings such as shame, fear, and anxiety. Healthy defenses can help us cope, but over-reliance on certain defenses can prevent personal growth. One common example is projection. A person who feels inadequate may accuse others of looking down on him. Someone who struggles with responsibility may constantly describe everyone else as incompetent. Another is denial, the refusal to acknowledge a painful reality. A man may say, "My relationships always fail because all my partners are unreasonable." It is a much easier story to accept then. "I may be repeating behaviors that hurt the people I love." The first story protects his ego. The second story requires growth, and growth often begins with a painful sentence. Many emotionally immature adults appear lazy, but sometimes beneath procrastination is fear. The fear of trying and discovering that they are not good enough. Think about the student who never studies for an exam. When he fails, he can say, "I did not even try." His self-image remains protected. Failure did not prove he was incapable. It only proved he did not make an effort. This psychological strategy can continue into adulthood. The man who never commits to a career. The person who never truly invests in a relationship. The individual who constantly talks about dreams but never acts. The fantasy remains perfect because reality never has the chance to challenge it. The dream of becoming successful is safer than risking the possibility of ordinary failure. But there is a devastating price. Years pass, opportunities disappear. Potential slowly transforms into regret. Some parents believe love means protecting a child from every disappointment. They fight every battle, solve every conflict, make every difficult decision. They remove pain from their child's life, but they also remove something else, the opportunity to develop resilience. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research on mindsets has shown that people who view abilities as something that can be developed tend to respond to challenges and setbacks differently from those who believe their qualities are fixed. Struggle is not evidence of inadequacy. It is often the process through which competence grows. A child who never experiences manageable failure may become an adult who is terrified of failure. Because failure is no longer a teacher, it becomes a threat to identity. In the beginning, many relationships with a man-child can feel exciting. He can be funny, spontaneous, adventurous. He may have the carefree energy of someone who refuses to become boring, and these qualities are not inherently negative. Many mature people maintain playfulness throughout their lives. But eventually, every serious relationship reaches the same crossroads. Responsibility, conflict, sacrifice, compromise, the moments when love stops being a feeling and becomes a decision. This is where emotional immaturity reveals itself. A disagreement becomes a battlefield. A request becomes criticism. A partner's needs become an inconvenience. A common dynamic emerges. One partner becomes the parent, the other becomes the child. One person remembers appointments, manages finances, plans the future, initiates difficult conversations, regulates emotional tension. The other avoids, forgets, complains, or waits to be guided. Over time, the romantic relationship begins to resemble a parent-child relationship. And there is a painful truth about attraction. People may care for children, they may protect children, but they rarely feel romantic desire towards someone they must parent. What begins as patience can slowly become exhaustion. What begins as love can transform into resentment. But the greatest irony is this: the man-child often desperately wants love. He wants acceptance. He wants understanding. He wants someone who never abandons him, yet his fear of responsibility may destroy the very intimacy he is searching for. Because true intimacy requires something children struggle to provide: accountability, the ability to say, "I hurt you. I was wrong. I will change." The question now becomes even more fascinating. If the man-child is not simply selfish, but often trapped by old fears and habits,